Hey, everybody. Welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive, coming to you live from Washington, D.C. We have another great show for you today. Lots of things going on in the world today, and especially in the Russia-Ukraine war. We got some developing issues, some breaking news, so to speak, we're going to talk about here today. And to do that, we have show favorite Big Tony. He is sorry, man. A little too familiar there. Tony is the author and president of the Project Sentinel, which is founded on constitutional concepts, advocating for practical solutions to today's challenges. Also host of the podcast, The Hard Truth, which is what we're going to be talking about here. Yeah. And man, there's a lot of hard truths that need to be talked about today, Tony, especially with regard to what's coming out of both Kiev and Washington regarding the Ukraine-Russia war. And it's pretty ugly. That's the hard truth, I think.
It is, and it's even harder when you have people who are essentially the equivalent of the high school debating team in charge of our national security. So there's an old little meme that goes around, shows a picture of John Wayne. Life is tough. It's tougher when you're stupid. We got stupid people in charge, so it's really tough. So
yeah, it is, and it's anguishing, frankly, to me, to know that so many people have paid with their lives because of this, and unfortunately, it's not limited to Washington. There's plenty of problems in Ukraine as well, and we're going to get into a little bit of that. But let's jump right in here, and first of all, I want to set the stage a little bit because we've already talked a lot about, you and I, about the fact that the summer offensive failed for Ukraine, and a lot of the reasons why. But instead of saying, hey, you know what, the fundamentals are not lining up here, we need to do something different. Here's what they're actually saying. Now we need to have another mobilization of another 500,000 people, and we'll try this again. Here's what they're saying.
President Zelensky's announcement that he's considering mass conscription. He said in a press conference in Kyiv that he was looking at proposals from his military to mobilize between 450,000 and 500,000 men and women to fight against the Russian invaders in his country.
Okay, so you and I are not the only ones that see with our eyes what's going on. People in Ukraine, well, they're not dumb, and here's what they're thinking.
Я думаю, цього не буде достатньо. Нам потрібна допомога Заходу, Америки. Нашого війська не вистачить. Це моя думка.
Всплывает мотивация у людей, и поэтому люди сейчас мне кажется, людей, которых будет принудительно пытаться заставлять щось робити, це вже не те військо буде. Ну, це моя точка зору.
Це не поможе. Бо мобілізувати купу людей і нічого їм не давати – це різні речі.
So there's more desperation than even trying to swamp in another 500,000 after they've already brought in, God only knows total of how many. I mean, it could be well over 1 million since this thing started so far. But now that they're trying to actually pull people back from overseas, as we see here.
As Ukraine's army grapples with war fatigue and rising casualties, it is now planning to recruit 500,000 more soldiers. The Ukrainian Defense Minister Rustem Umerov has said that he'll be inviting Ukrainian men living abroad to report to recruitment centers run by the armed forces to help defend the country against the ongoing Russian invasion.
So they want to try to somehow compel people to come back and to die in this area that they just fled from. So that's a little eyebrow raising that they think that would actually get large numbers of people. But that doesn't seem to dim the enthusiasm of Zelensky at all.
Ukraine's defense industry is not just recovering, it is becoming as productive as it needs to be for a modern, technology-driven warfare. For the next year, we have set ourselves crystal clear goals in terms of artillery, drones, missiles, and armored vehicles. One of our major political results this year is an agreement with our partners, particularly the United States, on co-production of weapons.
Now, man, that sounds good. Gary, throw our favorite picture up there again, if you can find that when Zelensky was in town and all these, oh yeah, there it is. All this school picture of all these smiling faces, even though they're talking about a war. And man, these are all the kings of industry, of military industry, and how happy they are for this war to continue on. Zelensky's like saying, yeah, come on, as this country is burning down all around him. What do you make of all this?
Well, I can tell in that picture, everybody has visions of their new 30-foot yacht they're going to get for a bonus. And of course, they're going to buy Zelensky a nice Palm Beach estate down in Florida. So that's what they're all thinking about there. It's like sugar plums dancing in their head in the form of U.S. taxpayer dollars enriching all of them to a great deal. So that's the brutal truth. It is what it is. And the montage there, Danny, I think is interesting by the fact that according to the progressive left and the neocons, which are pretty much merged together in a blob of evil, have continued to say that there's going to be a coup against Putin as soon as this week. Putin could be out of office by Friday. Like, okay. And it's like all this gloom and doom for the Russians. Like, have you not watched the 4-hour talk that Putin did a few days ago? Have you not actually taken the pulse of the people in Moscow?
Right. And
I'd be interested to find out the mirror of this, because I'm sure if you go on the streets of Moscow right now, everybody's going to say, "Oh, I love Putin. I love what's going on. Yeah, we have to sacrifice, but we're doing the right thing." It's the opposite. It's the mirror image of what we see in Ukraine. But nobody wants to talk about that, Danny. Nobody wants to go. Nobody wants to go to Moscow and ask the hard questions because they don't want to hear the answer that, "Oh yeah, we're with Putin. We don't care. We the economy's growing again. It's going in the right direction." So the point of that is morale of the people matters a lot. And not only are they trying to recruit overseas, they're actually trying to enlist, that is the Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian government trying to enlist other nations to basically do a black bag job and grab people for them. Estonia, for example, has said, "Oh yeah, we'll return your citizens for you." Gee, that sounds like it may be a bit intense and pervasive. I think that means they're going to grab people. That's why I'm reading that.
I mean, that's certainly because I know that there are some people in a number of these countries that actually would like to do that because it's starting to be a really big burden on their own domestic situation. They'd probably be happy to do that. But, I want to jump back to what you said just a second ago about Putin, because let's take a look at what Putin actually did say during part of that, and just notice how confident he is with what he's saying here. This doesn't sound like somebody who's afraid he's going to get deposed pretty soon.
Yeah.
F-16 supply is going to change anything? No, it's not going to change anything. There is going to be an electoral cycle, and they are preparing for that, and they are pushing the Ukrainians to show some results because they have no pity for Ukrainians. The Ukrainian leadership does not care. It does not have any pity for their own citizens, for the soldiers. They are simply sending them to that massacre. Is it going to prolong the conflict? Yes, it is.
And then, of course, in this the speech that you're talking about, that 4-hour marathon the other day, he was very confident talking about negotiated settlement. Look, you're either going to negotiate with me and you're going to demilitarize, or we're just going to keep going.
And boy, wasn't it great to have Joe Biden do a 4-hour reply? That's a joke. He didn't. So,
yeah.
No, I'm just saying, Spanky Bananas and Zippity Doodads. Tony Blinken and Lloyd Austin were apparently just not focused on the reality which we face. Because right now, the very thing that Putin said is what is apparent, and we're ignoring. The people of Ukraine are the ones suffering the greatest in this entire thing.
Again, Tony, I got to ask though. Okay, you and I are both combat vets. We had a career in the military, so it's reasonable that we would be able to look and assess the situation and be able to say with some confidence and some accuracy, what the different fundamentals equal in terms of combat. We can't be the only two. How can it not be that the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State aren't given this kind of advice behind the scenes? Because I almost think that they can't be, because if they actually knew what you and I say with the same degree of alarmity, and they've got all the access to the classified information that right now you and I don't have. But even if Biden did want that outcome, and I understand why he would want to, that Russia would lose, that Ukraine would win. Okay, cool. I get that. That is an aspiration. But they would have to tell him that, sir, what you're asking can't be done. And for A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K reasons why. So let's don't go down that path. But instead, they keep parroting the line of the aspiration. Can you kind of unwind what you think is actually going on in that dynamic between what do they actually know and then what they're actually saying?
Well, they're doing this on purpose. Let me just be very clear that these people aren't stupid. As much as I make fun of them and ridicule them because of their inability to actually accomplish even what they want to accomplish, the chaos is sought. They've sought the chaos. And to your point, no, I've worked for Lloyd Austin. He was the brigadier general I worked for in Afghanistan for my first tour, and he's not stupid. He is not stupid. As much as I think he's got some blind spots, as any a serving officer does. Tony Blinken, as much as I make fun of him all the time, he's not stupid. They're evil. They're both evil. And what they do is they feed the aspirations of political leadership. That's what you said. You used the word, I think, twice, aspirations. The aspirational thinking is what actually feeds the commentary and actions of Austin and Blinken.
Okay.
Their job is to not manage the enterprise. It's to manage the political desires and dreams of the Democrat Party. That's what they're doing.
Are you saying that he actually believes what he said right here?
Virtually all of the security assistance that we've provided to Ukraine, that gets invested right here in the United States. It builds our own defense industrial base. So in many ways, this is a win-win for us.
Ouch. A win-win?
That's absolutely true. A drop of Jupiter in his hair, so to speak. I mean, by the way, how does he get his hair to do that? Does he have like a special iron that does some sort of curl, like that? I don't know. That's a question I want answered. But to the point of his comments, yeah, that's the brutal truth. This is all about enriching. By the way, I've heard said, oh well, Congress didn't pass anything before they went home. Of course they did. There's $800 million in the AUMF, which, by the way, you and I might agree should the conditions for the establishment of the authorized use of military force, which was just approved, the conditions for that have been met 5 times over, and the very people that they sought to go after are dead, in prison, or otherwise disposed of. Yet here we are 22 years later using the authorized use of military force from 9/11 to conduct all this stuff. Are you kidding me?
Unbelievable.
And so, but back to your point, yeah, look, they put nearly $1 billion in the budget for Ukraine quietly in the AUMF. So it's all kabuki. It's all kabuki. It's all shadows. It's all about look at the bright, shiny object over here and don't pay attention to what's really going on. That's why they don't report on foreign media saying things that are clearly true. I have to reference stuff all the time in my interviews from foreign sources because U.S. will not pick up on stuff.
Right.
And the other thing to your point regarding aspirations and this, yeah, of course, the defense industry, I could say some things that would really get me in trouble. And I have some friends who work for the defense industry. I've known several officers who are board members. And I'm sorry, once you start taking a paycheck from one of those big corporations, it's hard to walk away from, $80,000 to $100,000 just for sitting on a board to do phony baloney work. So I'm just saying.
But Tony, this even spin has its culmination point, and even aspirations at some point can wash out. And I guess that, as we say here many times, that reality trumps spin at some point. It happened in Afghanistan in August 2021, and that was so ugly. We can talk about that all day long. But now I think it's starting to dawn on here, and we have breaking news this morning. And we don't have any video on it just yet, but Politico is reporting that actually Biden is now saying out loud that, you know what, we're going to probably have to do a negotiated settlement, and Ukraine's probably going to have to give up some land. After he just had Zelensky here in town and talked about how we are going to stay with you forever. And on this show, Tony, we actually did a clip of when Ashraf Ghani was in Washington with Biden 2 months before that disintegrated. And now here we are just a few weeks later, after telling him we're going to stay with you forever. Now he's saying, or we could support you giving up some of your land for peace, which is the only path out.
It is. And again, one of the things I've said from the beginning, literally like within the first 6 months of the war, Ukraine will not prevail unless an outside military force interdicts. That is to say that the numbers just aren't there. You've got a Russia that is literally 10 times larger, 10 orders of magnitude larger than the Ukrainian. As a matter of fact, at this point, depending on sources, I don't want to get into sources, but suffice it to say, depending on which source you go to, Russians are only using between 10 to 25% of its overall military to do what it's doing. So, it's like the Russians aren't trying to build up. They aren't trying to go into Europe. I think that would be a war that they don't want, because Putin does want a solid economy. They do want to return to prosperity. I don't doubt that. And going to war with NATO would not result in prosperity. Just say it.
Yeah,
So
and he can keep the support of his people right now because they feel like NATO has been coming against them in the Ukraine issue, and there's a lot of justification.
Exactly.
There wouldn't be any if he said, "Oh, I'm just going to go on a conquest." No one's going to want to support that because they know
Nobody
would be
wants
suicide.
that. So people, again, they're misreading all this, but I think they're misreading it purposely, Danny. But yeah, to the point here is like, I think there's finally a recognition, a hard recognition by Jake Sullivan and some others who are not so predisposed to the neocons. The neocons would continue to send money over and say, "Oh, we just needed a little bit more money." We saw that in Iraq, Danny, right? We saw it in Iraq.
Yeah.
Just give us a little more money, we'll be fine. It's Afghanistan, just pour some more money in. That's always the solution. So I think people are recognizing that Mike Johnson, speaker, is like, yeah, I'm not buying into this anymore. Thanks. You need to come
now
up
let
with
me ask you this question, Tony.
Yeah.
I'd like to say, well, reality has finally imposed itself, and now then Biden has just recognized that this is the only path out, and that just supporting you for as long as it takes, or even as long as we can, which he changed it the other day, is not going to work. But I wonder, though, now that the calendar is just about to tick into 2024, is Biden finally saying, if we keep on going on this and Russia actually does start to gain more territory, that's going to look really bad on my reelection campaign. So we need to start getting this nipped in the bud now before we get close to November. How much do you think of that's playing into this?
Well, Putin actually diagnosed this as a factor in his own speech. He said basically that everything that the Biden administration does, he referred to the Americans, us overall, is done based on domestic policy. So whatever's going on with Biden, it's based on polling data that relates to his reelection. That's all they're focused on. And that's why you've seen this duality of message regarding Israel. I don't want to get into that this minute. I'm just saying that if you look at how they literally talk at both sides of their mouth, it's all about trying to attenuate the message that benefits them best for the domestic audience. That's what they're doing. It's like the issue regarding Task Force Prosperity Guardian. My goodness sake, we're funding. We want to fund all this effort to stop the Houthi and all these.
Right.
Yeah. At the same time, we're giving $6 billion to Iran, which then funds the Houthi. So we're funding both sides of the conflict, which apparently is typical of this administration. But that's why you see this duality of message and feckless result. They don't want any result that would potentially jeopardize the domestic message. And Putin gets that right when he talks about it.
Now, do you have any insight in it, whether just intuition or any sources that you may have that can talk about the dynamic inside Ukraine? Because I religiously follow, as one of my routine sources, Ukrainian Telegram channels, where they have actually been, especially I've got 5 or 6 channels that have just almost been spot on. They've almost been like a month or so ahead of us in the Western media, what's been going on throughout this war. And there's a lot of talk about a potential Maidan 3, they're calling it, where the people are going to finally say Zelensky's just detached from reality and he's just throwing us to death with no possibility of success. Now, right now it may just be talk, but do you think that there's a line that, because that clip we just showed from, I think yesterday, Zelensky's still saying, no, man, we got a shot for 2024. We're going to retool. We're going to build up all this infrastructure, and then we're going to win in 2025 or something like that. I don't know what they're actually thinking. But is there a limit to how far the people of Ukraine are going to go in supporting this, that they might actually want to change the regime?
There's absolutely a limit. I think you have to reach a point of about 45% of the population finally saying enough's enough. And I don't think they're there yet, but they're getting close. The other thing to remember, Danny, is Zelensky. Zelensky is openly challenging and refused to step down and resign from his position as chief of the Ukrainian armed forces. And they've been going back. And one of the most interesting things within the media, which has been public, is that neither Zelensky or Zelensky want to be the one who is the public face of asking for 500,000 more troops. Zelensky says, "Oh, that's Zelensky." Zelensky says, no, Zelensky's the one doing the troops. I'm not involved. So that rift indicates to me that there may well be some sort of a military effort to fill that vacuum, because if Zelensky is not liked, people recognize that his policies are more and more delusional. The military has an opportunity. I'm not saying there's going to be a coup. I'm saying that the military may be the most competent force left for someone to assume the governance should Zelensky
and
be pushed out.
even not a coup situation. There is within Ukraine political circles, there has been a lot of desire to get Zelensky to run for president,
right,
assuming there's actually going to be an election, which right now there isn't. But there's been a lot of competition with him in that, because Zelensky's percentages of approval stay very high in the upper 70s, I think, despite all the battlefield setbacks. Whereas Zelensky's continues to drop. And of course, just like Biden, he's intently aware of that. He wants to keep his hold on power no matter what. And so he's going to want to try to shovel off the responsibility for failures onto him. But look, I mean, the truth is, and he is the head of state. He's the one who said, we're going to stay in Bakhmut no matter what. We're going to hold it. He didn't. He's the one that said, we're going to drive to the Azov coast. We didn't. He's the one who's saying, we're not leaving Avdiivka. We're going to hold on to that. And time will tell on that, but that's probably not looking very good either. And I think the time is building up where Zelensky, who said, we shouldn't have done any of those things, we should do something different, and Zelensky did. So I think that's starting to have an impact on the ground in Ukraine.
Yeah, look, Marinka, city over by Donetsk. I get these names wrong. I mean, I'm terrible for it, but Mariinka.
Yeah, Marinka,
is fallen to the Russians, and Zelensky won't admit it. Krinky is another besieged city that the Ukrainians are losing, as you mentioned, Avdiivka. So it's all bad news for the Ukrainians. And again, I would argue the Russians aren't even trying that hard. The Russians have been very effective in putting up these layered defenses and allowing the Ukrainians to uselessly expend their energy, their combat power on these layers, never getting past the first or second layer. So I got to tell you, it's overall an effective strategy, and Putin has been very deliberate. That's one of the things about Wagner and him back when that was an issue. Yeah. Wagner wanted to do things fast. Putin kept saying, no, we'll take our time. Yeah. And Putin recognized taking your time, letting the Ukrainians use all their energy on your defenses. It's easier to go back. It's much easier to go on the offensive. So the tactics are very effective. So
and by the way, not sure if you were aware of this, but one of our favorite go-to clip guys to give some perspective on this is retired General Ben Hodges, who's saying that in fact it's not Zelensky's fault. It's not Zelensky's fault. It's our fault.
Really?
No, two things. First of all, Ukraine has not failed. I think we in the West have failed. We failed to commit strategically to Ukraine winning, and therefore we have failed to deliver those capabilities that Ukraine needs and has expected that would enable the counteroffensive to be successful.
So, I mean, what do you think? I mean, is he right? Dang, we messed up. If only we had given more ATACMs earlier. If only we had, I don't know, something else, more tanks, not just 30, but 70 or whatever. It's always about the thing that they don't have. So, dang it, if only we had done this, even though we gave 5,000 military vehicles of various types and millions of shells, hundreds of thousands of other tank rounds, missiles, air defense shots, all these things. None of that was enough. We needed a little bit more, and it's our fault we didn't do enough.
The neocon way, Danny. This is what they do every war. Oh, just a little bit more. Look, let me be very blunt on this. The combat tactics that were recommended by Mark Milley and people like Hodges were doomed to fail. And maybe because Zelensky once wore high heels, Milley had an affinity for him. I don't know. I don't know these things. I don't want to get into it. But I'm just saying that Zelensky accepted the advice of these knuckleheads. And these knuckleheads, Danny, you've been in combat. You've been awarded for your combat valor. Who goes into combat without air superiority? Whoever does that. And yet these guys, Hodges, Petraeus, all of them, just go breach the barriers. Like,
you know what? You know what was even worse to me, Tony, is that in that about 2 weeks ago, the Washington Post had basically a post-mortem of why the summer offensive didn't work. And they actually revealed in there that the Pentagon officials thought it had a 50-50 shot of working, even though they didn't have air support, they didn't have air defense, they didn't have enough engineering support, they didn't have enough artillery shells, and they still thought it had a shot. That's crazy.
So to answer your question, we didn't fail the Ukrainians. Hodges failed the Ukrainians. Petraeus failed the Ukrainians.
Great way
the Center for War, Victoria Nuland, Jake Sullivan, all those knuckleheads, who pushed them to do this without adequate military preparation, adequate unit cohesion, basically unit cohesion along with unity of command. All these things were ignored. All the basic principles of warfare that these guys should have figured out at the War College, just saying, were ignored, or worse, I think they were set aside because, again, there was no desire for a victory here. They knew that there was not going to be a victory, and they didn't care. They set aside their oath of office and loyalty to the United States for purposes of benefiting their political cause and making money.
And here's what worries me now, among other things, is that this whole desire to get another 500,000 mobilization starting now is just sending lambs to the slaughter. I mean, for context here, the U.S. Army is less than 500,000 in its totality. And we have, all the layers of echelon leaders, NCOs with, 15, 20, 30, 40 years of experience that actually make an army. You're basically saying we're going to bring in 500,000 privates with no experience and somehow think that that's going to change what hasn't worked in 2 years. It's insane, and it's just leading people to slaughter, Tony.
Danny, I can't believe you've lost faith in the F-16s being the miracle weapon. I can't believe it.
Oh, that's right. There's going to be like 5 or 6 come out pretty soon. The whole thing will change.
It's going to be like Top Gun, only Ukraine style. You're going to have someone like a Tom Cruise up there shooting down Ruski jets, 10 at a time. And that's going to be pretty impressive with the 20 millimeter Vulcan gun. Just saying, I want to see that happen.
Yeah, I'll watch that movie because that's the only place it's going to happen is in a movie.
That's right. No, literally, the people we're talking about live in an alternate reality, and they think we're crazy because we call them out. It's like, no, I'm just looking at the facts. I have no political dog in the fight. I don't. It's as I always tell my friends, it's not that I don't care. I don't care. But I do care about the fact that we, the United States, have engaged in a foreign entanglement. There's no benefit to us. There's no end. Yeah. There's no reason for us to be involved. What essentially is a civil war. We are now engaged in what I believe is a civil war between the Russians and Ukrainians over issues much like the North and South had during our Civil War. And, other powers wisely chose back in the Civil War, in our Civil War, to not get involved. So, I just don't think it's a good idea for us to be involved, especially when we're actually encouraging tactical
malfeasance
actions, which will never result in strategic victory. Never.
Yeah, and that's such a good point to bring up because in all of this, where Zelensky continued to say we're going to get all of our territory back to the 1991 borders and whatever, that always ignored that there was a significant chunk in the eastern part that had rebelled from them. You're not going to reconquer that because they don't want to be reconquered. They're already at war with you, and they're never going to just allow you to liberate them. That's not even a possibility. It's a civil war, and they will die before that happens, as the people in the West would die before they would allow Russia to come in. That's what we're at.
Right. And the evidence of that very fact is you don't have an insurgency against the Russians. The Russians are accepted into those territories. And that's one of the things about the previous agreements, the Minsk agreements, all these other things, is that I think that both sides weren't necessarily completely honest, and that the lack of honesty and people kind of trying to game the system resulted in what we're seeing now. And again, I'm not a fan of Putin. I think Putin did this as much out of going after the gas and oil in the Donbass and the Black Sea as anything else. Did he go in because of the Russians? No doubt. But he's going to benefit because there's massive numbers of gas and oil reserves that were found in 2013. So, I mean, is he doing it because for national? Of course he is. but he's also doing it because it's going to benefit them greatly regarding the resources they're going to pull out of there.
You know, one of the other things, Tony, that just anguishes me, and I think that only more time and historians looking backwards are going to really be able to see the full scale of our disaster, self-inflicted disaster, is that Austin said early on that one of our absolute key objectives was to harm Russia, was to weaken them, because that's going to be cool. That's what we want to do. If we had ended this in the second or third month in Istanbul in 2022, if we had ended it sometime in after that, the 1 year mark or something, that would probably still have been the case, because Russia lost so many weapons and whatever, and then deprived of the compulsion to keep going, they would have been weaker. Now then, they're much stronger than they were, and I argue more strong than they were on February 2022, because they've burned off all the chaff, all these bad leaders they had at the various levels. Now they have combat experience. They've learned from their mistakes. They're better conventionally. Their industry is now cranking on all cylinders. They're coming up with new weapons of war they didn't have before. They know how our stuff works, by the way. They know how to beat our big missiles and other kind of things, our air power. All now with the F-16s, are going to learn even more once those things get in the air, if they do. But all of those things is making the balance worse for us, not better.
So that's a great point. I agree with it completely. When you examine what has happened regarding the reality of the conflict, the Russians, by the way, this is not the first time the Russians did this. The Russians did this when they were the Soviet Union in 1939 with Finland. They went in and got whacked by the Finns. I mean, they were losing 10-1. I mean, really, because they had basically taken, not as bad as I think. I mean, Putin's military at the beginning of this conflict was pretty soft, and I think he also, like George Bush, kind of was depending on guys telling him what he wanted to hear, because they, oh yeah, it'll be over in a week, and everybody's going to throw roses at your feet as you go into town. It's like, okay, but to that point, the Russians didn't back down, and they learned from their mistakes, like they did in Finland. By the time they were done with Finland, the lessons in Finland resulted in their being better prepared, not fully prepared, but better prepared for what came regarding the Nazis and the German invasion. It gave them a kind of a glide slope to go towards. And that's what happened over the past 2 years. They've learned from mistakes. They've increased their drone production. They're now masters of drones. I would not want to have to go and
anti-drone
them on the battle
technology as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, both of those. Yeah, that's right. I think we don't know what's coming into us. If we have to go up against that, we're going to be starting from way behind the power curve.
It'll be tough. It will be tough, because I think we have technology, but again, to your point, we have a military that's lowest ever manpower. It's high tech. And I'm not saying we shouldn't use high tech for purposes of trying to maximize our effects on the battlefield. It's the right way to do it.
Oh, absolutely.
It is. I don't think we've done the block and tackle, the basics, which are necessary for a military to have effective cohesion, which I'm worried about.
Tony, on top of that, look, I was in the Future Combat Systems program during my time in active duty, and I saw painfully firsthand in the program how incompetent our senior leaders are about trying to make things technological. I saw on the ground the testing that was going on, what the technology was, and there was a bunch of stuff we could have done really well, but because those guys were in charge of it they had no idea what they were doing. They were going after the aspirational stuff, the movie type stuff, and then they ended up destroying it. We got nothing out of all of that.
I don't put it on my resume often, but I worked for a AI company, artificial intelligence company, was trying to do the STOSCO, the system of systems language, which was Boeing's big thing regarding FCS. No, I was involved in all that. I just don't like talking about it because it was so screwed up. People don't understand how much money the Army had FCS and combat CPOF, combat command post of the future, going at the same time. Doing the same thing. I mean, it's like I went up to, I know I'm deviating here, but I went up to Fort Dix when I was working on the Boeing program, and I got a CPOF briefing. Command post of the future is like, this is the same thing. It's like everybody's doing the same thing here, and equally badly, I might add.
Right. So that's why I'm saying that with all this drone and counter drone stuff, even though we have lots of high tech people, I have no confidence that we'll be able to weaponize it in a way that will improve our national defense. I think that we'll screw that up.
Yeah. No, I agree. So the lack of self-awareness, if there's one thing, it's very clear. The lack of self-awareness by this administration and the happy talk and the complete departure they have from the reality. It's all because of politics. It's all because they see things politically. Everything they do is political. and they have no regard for their oath of office or doing those things necessary to protect the nation. And that's why you see these just completely horrendous policies resulting in less than optimal outcomes. I'll be polite about that. So,
yeah, that's going to be a real problem going forward, and we're going to see how this is all going to play out over time. Definitely want to have you back really quick to talk about this, because I want to see more what happens in the next couple of days about this announcement and how that actually turns into anything, and what the reaction is on the Ukrainian side and what changes, if any, that has in the war. But we're actually going to have an American volunteer who was just on the front lines on our show tomorrow, and we're going to find out what the soldiers are thinking behind the scenes and how all this is affecting them. But we'll be looking forward to continuing that dialogue with you when we come back on the next time. Thanks for coming on our show today, Tony. We really appreciate it.
Danny, I always enjoy being here. I enjoy our conversations. I hope the audience does too. So,
I do too. We look forward to having you back next time. It's always a treat.
We should do a forecast of what's going to happen next year on your next show.
We should. That's exactly what we ought to do. Yeah. So even before, we should do that. I wish I would already think of that, but yeah, we got to do it. We got two smart guys here. We could probably come up with some pretty good ideas.
Yeah. I'm predicting that Tony Blinken's going to change his hairdresser. Just saying. So.
Wow, that's a pretty bold statement. We're going to see how that plays out in 2024.
It is. He's going to go for the Lex Luthor look. Just saying. So
that's good. Well, I'm not sure I do want to see that one, but that's all the time we have for you today, and we are going to ask you to come back tomorrow so that you can see Matt Van Dyke, who is going to have some insights that you're just not going to get anywhere else besides right here. And we are always unintimidated and uncompromised on bringing you the truth, no matter what it is, so that you can make sense out of your life. And we will look forward to seeing you tomorrow on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.